Have you ever been bored out of your mind during a guided walking tour? Hi, my name is Yves and I'm the Beardbarian. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Beardbarian. Today we're going to dive into how I became a city guide and what I did or what you can do to make your guided tours more interesting to the visitor and what you, a visitor, can expect when you go on a guided tour with me. Let's go! That makes me really nostalgic being here today. This is the place where I study history here at the University of Ghent, and really just seeing all these young people sitting out there today in the sun who are about to start chasing more knowledge, that's actually a really big pleasure to see and behold. Now, when I started studying here a few years ago, I was looking for money. I was looking for a job, some way to earn some cash, because there's so many great pubs in this town, there's a museum, there's just a lot of great shit to do out here. So, needless to say, I wanted to make some cash. So in the hallway was this piece of paper, just a regular piece of paper hanging there, black ink printed on it, saying if you want to earn some money doing guided tours, mail to this address. Very plain, very simple. Now, I loved walking around in this town, I loved history, and I had been intrigued already by some guided tours I'd seen and followed. So I thought this was a great opportunity. Now, the first thing I did, despite being this enthusiastic, was looking up the email address just to make sure nothing sketchy would happen. So the first thing I saw was this weird website made by an American guy with photographs describing his adventures in Belgium, how he fell in love with Bruges, and everywhere just like the same pictures of him holding up posters of his walking tours, him holding up bottles of beer, which was some really great branding, I think. So yeah, I mailed the guy, got in touch with him, and that would be the beginning of my guiding tour career. I still have that badge from the first free walking tour company I used to work for, Can You Handle It Tours. I still know the boss. I saw him a few years ago again. He also does tours in Germany nowadays. I think nowadays he moved most of his business to Germany, in Cologne, in Berlin. So if you happen to go to those cities, you can get in touch with this guy and his company, and if you do, tell him I said hi. This is the exact spot where my adventure with the first free walking tour company started. It's where I met the chief of the company, where I started following his first tour to learn how he did things and how he told things about Ghent. And it would be where I would be waiting for all my tours to begin. Because that's the principle of a free walking tour. You just make known to potential customers where your tour is going to start, and then you just wait for a certain hour to see if people show up. So very often you're out there waiting, no customers might show up, or suddenly there might be 50 people wanting to do a walking tour. So it involves a lot of waiting, especially since this was just a starting company. They already had earned their medals in Bruges, but they were fresh to Ghent. They were counting on me to help build Ghent. And as I will mention later again, in free walking tours, a lot is your own responsibility. It's a great way to build responsibility. And as you were joining a young company, you have to make sure you yourself have to grow the company and make sure people will attend the tours. Otherwise, it's your own fault that you're waiting for no customers. So what did I do? I created my own board. I created a medieval shield with the company brand on it and a mention of free walking tours, just to make people, just to make it visible to people that I was here to provide guided tours for them. So the first training I got was fast, was intense, because the company wanted to get going. They wanted to hit Ghent fast and they wanted to hit it hard. So yeah, my first tour after one training session was a disaster. The tour I just witnessed from my chief was something completely different from any tour I'd witnessed so far. There were a lot of jokes, was very high energy, and there were a lot of stories about the modern times in Ghent and just in general what life in Ghent is like. Whereas I had always seen guides that talk just about history, we're very dry, we're very official. So I wanted to be like those official guides. So when I did away with all the jokes, when I did away with all the modern talk of Ghent, not much was left in terms of history. And my first tour I gave was very short. Now the lady did give me a tip, but because I was so afraid and so ashamed of the tour I had just given, I offered to buy the lady a drink, so that first €3 I got went up in smoke when I bought her a beer. Now I went with her, I went drinking a beer, and while drinking with her and just being friendly and making small talk, I talked about Ghent. I talked about what Ghent was to me as a student, the things I liked in Ghent. And after the drink, she told me, during this 2-hour drink, you were more interesting to me than during the guided tour. So that was the moment I knew I had to shift my way of being a guide. So afterwards, I would often try to be more engaging, talk more about how I personally saw Ghent, because it gives more of an experience to people. They don't come to a city, they don't follow a tour to become Wikipedia experts of Ghent. They come to a city and they want to know how it is, what it's like to live here, and how it's different from the life in their country, in their town. Now, it was while working for that first tour company that I met Andy. Andy was mostly a guide in Bruges, but he was also helping to set up Ghent. And to be honest, Andy is still a very good friend. He still has a very amazing guiding business in Bruges when he's not working for the army, because that's his main job. And he has been all over the time a very important mentor. Get yourself a mentor who can teach you about these things, whatever you want to do. If you want to start a guiding business, if you want to start a management, if you want to start promotion and marketing, just get yourself a mentor who can talk you through a lot of issues, who can teach you new things and just give you some positive feedback and criticism while you are doing things. For me, this was Andy. Be sure to check out his business site, Your Bruges, in case you ever think of visiting Bruges. Shout out to you, Andy. Now, while I was out there in front of that castle gate working for that first company, I was also picked up by another tour company. The guy who ran that company was always riding by on his bicycle every day when I was doing tours. We ended up chatting with each other, and that's how I ended up working for 2 companies, since he invited me to help him out as well with Ghent. Now, during my time working for those 2 companies, I picked up a lot of skills that of course benefited me as a guide, but actually helped me a lot afterwards as well, for presentations, but also for job interviews, sales pitches. So if you feel like these are things you're not very good at, you might listen and even take away some skills yourself. Now, first of all, there was a skill to read a crowd. As I mentioned before, my chief delivered very high energy tours, constantly talking about everything, pointing everywhere, telling a lot of jokes with a very loud, clear voice. But that doesn't work for everybody. So when you do a guided tour or do anything else that involves talking to a crowd of people, you have to know when that works and when not. There are a lot of people who are more, who like a more serene, a more calm tour through a city way more. There are people booking a guided tour with a guide who don't even want the guide to talk all that much and actually just want to enjoy the view and have somebody who, with just a few words, paints the picture for them. So read your crowd, know how to say something and what to say something. Those are part of the first skill. The second skill you definitely need is know how to find your new stories. All in all, it's not hard to find information. You can go on Wikipedia, you can open a book, but it really takes a skill to find a story. It helps if you center your presentation, your guided tour around a focal point, a certain focus you want to work towards, and then you find information that helps you get there. That's how you create a story. So know how to add more stories to your tour without becoming too fractured. If you just start adding stories that you read somewhere on top of your story, they're just gonna end up with a huge mess, and nobody's gonna understand where you want to take them, and nobody's gonna understand in what world you want to bring them through your guided tour or presentation. All in all, you can look at it this way. The city where you are, or the corner where you're standing, is just a blank canvas. It's not even the background, it's just a canvas. It starts becoming the background when you introduce them to the place where you are. Even the minute details of how you present this place start making a certain picture, start painting it in a certain way. Then when you start adding more layers, when you start talking about people, when you start talking about traditions or certain actions, you're adding people, you're adding trees, you're adding birds to the painting. And that's how you should build a story to add in your world that you're trying to bring towards your audience. Don't just start throwing in people when you don't even know yet what your canvas or your background is. Start building it that way, and you're guaranteed that your story will arrive the way you intend it to. Related to the second skill, but not entirely the same, is a third skill, and is a skill of twisting a story. Now, you might have your stories ready, you might know a lot of new stories, but sometimes you just don't have a story that entirely fits the narrative that interests one of the people in your audience or your audience in general. For example, I might have people visiting that are interested in a history more of economical development rather than the history of political events, battles, etc. So what you then have to do is to just add a few details and leave away a few that don't really matter to those people, and you just create a completely new narrative with material that you already have at hand. For example, you can tell the story about how the castle was built, who built it, and you can tell it all in the perspective of the counts, the people who built it. But if you just twist it and you start telling it from the narrative how the people of the city perceived the castle, you don't need a lot of new information, but just by changing the perspective, you make the story a lot more interesting to an audience that cares about the economics rather than the politics. So with just that tiny bit of skill, you completely change your presentation, you completely change your guided tour without a lot of effort. The fourth skill you'll need to develop is the skill of diplomacy. While you're doing your guided tours or any presentation, there's people who might not agree. Sometimes as a tourist you're guiding around, it's even worse if it's locals ending up interrupting your tour because they disagree with what you say. And you know, it's sometimes hard to tell who is right. Sometimes it might just be a difference of interpretation, it might be actually a difference of how they see facts, or maybe just one of the two is completely wrong about facts. And then you'll have to solve it, because if somebody interrupts your presentation, if somebody interrupts your tour, you have to find a way to keep it going, to keep the story moving forward. So you can either just stress your disagreement and point out why you think you are right or they might be wrong, or you might be looking more towards a more pacific or pacifying solution. Maybe just say like, I'm not entirely sure about the way you tell it, I've always heard it my way. Just try to listen, because it might also be interesting for the tourists you are guiding around to have that little interaction with the locals. Just make sure, don't allow the locals to paint you as a complete liar. I have confidence in my tours, other people should have confidence in what they are saying, and just take it as a learning moment, but also a moment to let yourself shine as having that diplomatic skill in solving this little dispute. Very close to diplomacy, very important when you enter in this diplomatic debate, is also to be honest. If somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer, the first step, the best step I think, is just saying, I don't know. If you do that, you can avoid a lot of discussions, you can avoid a fight, because if you just start spouting nonsense, if you just start making a really uneducated guess that's completely wrong, you might also end up in a complete discussion that shows that you don't know what you're talking about and that you just made that gas, pulled it out of your arse, and that's not a very good way to have your tour or your presentation. So admitting, just being honest that you don't know is the first step. Now, of course, you have to make sure that you just don't have an entire tour where you just go all the time, I don't know, because then this is not a job you should be doing already. You should take more time to learn more about the city, learn more facts, work on your stories. That's not saying that if this happens that you are not fit for the job. It just means you are not fit for the job yet, and you should take it as a learning moment. So if somebody asks you a question and you don't know, get it down somewhere, write it down, record it on your phone, but make sure that you look it up when you get home, and it will be something you can add maybe during one of your future tours. Now, still in the range of honesty, but also a little bit riskier, is make an educated guess and give the arguments. Don't just make a guess, but tell the people why you think it might be right, but also let them know it's a guess. Very important. The fifth skill of part of information that's very important is to actually live through your story. Even if you don't live in the city that you're guiding in, even if you don't actually have a direct connection to the story you have to present, make sure you know the information that anybody who does live that life would have access to. For example, if you're guiding in a city, you shouldn't just know the historical facts, or you shouldn't just know what all the names of the buildings are. You should actually know the price of living there, know what the rent is, know what the price of a house is, know the good restaurants and pubs. Tell people about the pubs you love visiting, because it paints the picture of how it is like to live in such a town. And that's in the end one of the most important parts when you are doing a guided tour. My very good mentor Andy once told me, people doing a guided tour, they should not have the feeling they're walking around with a guide, they should have the feeling they're walking around with a friend. And while not everybody loves that approach, it definitely helps. It makes you so much easier to sympathize with, so it is my advice. It also works for other parts. If you're trying to sell something, get into the mind of the person who wants to buy it. Give them the information they need. Don't just give them a bland story about how great your product is. Tell them why this product matters to them and how it can change their specific lives. Now, during all these years where I've been a guide, I met a lot of people touched my heart, and I surely hope I touched theirs. And there's actually still a few people that I'm still friends with on Facebook, and they regularly send me pictures from their travels, and I keep them updated to what I am doing as a guide, as a brewer, and as a musician. Now, the reason I was able to achieve this, I like to believe, is because I presented my town where I guide as an ecosystem rather than as an attraction. Because if you present the town they're visiting as an attraction, you're literally just the guy cutting the tickets. If you do succeed in presenting your town as an ecosystem, or whatever you're trying to sell as part of an ecosystem, you create a much more engaging story. Rather than visitors, the people you're telling it to become part of the ecosystem, part of the story, and you're creating a connection. And that's what it's all about, connection. You create connection between you, yourself, and the listener, and whatever is going on around them. And that's what actually the people are trying to enjoy. They want to be part of something. And what else would they want to be part of than this great town or this great product that you have actually just been spending 2 hours of presenting it to them as the greatest place to be. So, just like everything else in life, there's good sides and bad sides to the free walking tour community and the entire system that surrounds it. One of the good things there is that it's very good to train your entrepreneurial spirit, to teach yourself that self-responsibility, because in the end, the tour you are giving to people, that's completely your thing. You have to find the facts, you have to find the information, turn it into an interesting tale, and you have to be able to train yourself to bring it in an entertaining way that hits people in the right place. If that doesn't happen, you won't make a lot of tips, you won't earn a lot of money, people will complain about you on TripAdvisor, and in the end the company will give you less and less tours until they will just ask you to leave. Another very nice thing about it is the sense of community. Often guides that work for a free walking tour community, they come from everywhere. They bring a lot of different experiences to the table. They bring stories from their country, they bring stories from their life, and things that they might just have more general knowledge about to the table. And these people train each other. It was one of the most beautiful things that I had happened to me, was me telling the new guides what they had to tell, what they could talk about, and think with them about what kind of stories that would work for their kind of tale they wanted to tell during one of their guided tours. So that was definitely fun. Also, the free walking tours, they offer kind of a counterforce to the traditional tours, which might sometimes be boring. I'm not saying traditional guides are boring in general, but sometimes they are a bit more stiff, which has less appeal to younger people. So that's something that free walking tours actually do very well. It forces the more traditional guides to also be more creative in their approach of how to walk and talk when they're going through a city with tourists, which is just better for everybody in the long run. Now, those are some of the positive sides, but of course there's also a few negative sides. As I mentioned, the tours, the free walking tours, rely heavily on tips, which means very often that some guides might be very eager to get that bit of money. Some of the guides might be very eager to get your tip. So whereas I tried to limit myself to asking for the tips once or twice in the tour, you actually have guides who will try to ask for a tip at nearly every stop, turning it into like these jokes that you kind of feel aren't really jokes, where they're just asking for your money. So that might not be a very pleasant situation for the visitor. Now, those jokes that constantly asking for tips actually comes from the free walking tour system sometimes, because these people feel forced to ask for your money. It's not fun for them either, because it kind of feels like they're begging. They feel like beggars when they do this, and it's not fun. If you have a guide doing this all the time, asking you for money every 5 minutes, every 500 meters you walk, you know they're not working for a fun company. If your free walking tour guide doesn't do this or asks not as much for tips, then you know you're working for somebody who actually loves being there, who's not under a lot of pressure from his company. So then you know you're really dealing with a good guide. That's the other thing. Since most of these free walking tour companies are based off of tips, their stories are not always correct. They might feel forced to tell you the funniest story possible, the most incredible story possible, but incredible and funny are not always, it's not always easy to combine that with telling the truth. So a lot of these stories might just be local legends. They might be exaggerations of stuff that happened, which is not really what tourists are looking for. So that's definitely a drawback on the free walking tours. Now, another thing that's a bit of a drawback on the free walking tours, once again, comes down to those tips. Those tips are very hard to trace for tax collectors and such. It's basically money that doesn't exist. It's cash in the hand. And at the end of the tour, the guides will have to hand over part of it to the company they're working for. The company might have a system. It's very often either a percentage or a fixed count, a fixed amount of money per person on the tour. So what happens to that money afterwards? You don't know. One way, it's normal that people have to hand over some of the money they make to the company, because of course the company pays for the insurance, they pay for promotion, they pay for a website, and they do pay taxes. But once the money is handed over, you don't know if the company writes down everything they earn or if they just write down a fictitious number and actually commit fraud on the taxes. So that's definitely a drawback. So you can imagine, if these free walking tour companies don't declare this money they make, all these tips, they're committing tax fraud, and that's not entirely fair towards the official guides that do start their own company and who do pay taxes on most of the money they make. So think twice about this before you go to a free walking tour company. There are honest free walking tour companies out there, but if you notice the guide is stressed about making tips, if you notice the guide is asking for money all the time and making up stories as they go, you're probably dealing with the wrong kind of free walking tour company, and I'm not saying get out, but try to see if you can help the guide in any way to have a more relaxing experience. Now, one of the many things that I really loved during my time in Ghent is the social skills you have to develop during this kind of work. You have to talk with your fellow guides. At one point I was training a new group of guides, new young people who came into the business, who didn't know their way around Ghent very well. But on the other hand, they went more to parties and such than I did. So while I talked about history and talked about certain traditions here in Ghent, they taught me more about the nightlife, which made my tours richer. So by that interaction, by that exchange of ideas and knowledge, everybody grew, everybody got better, and as a total, the company would benefit from this creativity. Now, some of these young people who end up working for free walking tour companies are tourists who come here and hear these stories about how much fun it is to be in free walking tours, and it definitely is fun. You go to all the parties, you make a lot of tip money if you do it very well, you live in a hostel, you see part of the world while working a little bit, doing very fun work. So that's the bright side of it for these people. But if you're not as good, again, you end up having a lot of stress. Or what also sometimes happens is that they actually don't make enough money. They're just staying here, and during these tours they make some money, but they end up drinking it because you're expected to go on parties with the tourists, and after a while they're just out of money. They're not making enough money to keep on paying for the hostel, they don't make enough money to buy a ticket back home, and sometimes they just have to call their mom and dad and say, "Hi mom, dad, I'm stuck here in Belgium, can you send me some money to get back to home?" So that's definitely a very unpleasant side of working for these free walking tour companies. I was from Belgium, obviously didn't have that issue. I could just go home and not to be, bragging, but I usually did make a nice amount of tip money, so I also never had to call my mom and dad to send me bus tickets to get back home. So all in all, that's something to think about. Now, the other people who might have a problem with these free walking tours, as I mentioned earlier, are other guides, official guides. First of all, the fact that young people bring a very fresh approach to guided tours is very confrontational for them who've already taken a long train, who craft their stories with a lot of attention for correctness, but they're also confronted with those people often being cheaper, and they are a very big competition on the market. So for example, in Bruges things really got out of hand, people got into fights, and the official guides called the free walking tour companies pirates. Now, pirates, I mean, these people aren't real criminals. It's not like they're robbing people on the streets. I do understand some of the animosity, but calling each other criminals, even though there are free walking tour companies who are actually doing a really great job, is not going to solve this problem. So the last few years, more regulation has been added. There's been made more laws and rules. So I hope this will help in the future to make these free walking tour companies work better together with the official or trained guides, and maybe we will have this very dynamic market of guided tour companies working together. Some can be more fun, some can be cheaper, and some can be more official and more expensive. It doesn't matter. We're all there with a purpose, and the tourist in the end decides who is more fit to show them the town that they're visiting. Now the thing is, while I was doing all these guided tours as a student in Ghent, most people, my peers, my family, friends, most of them saw it as a hobby that I was doing. And I can't really blame them. I was using all the money I earned for creating more experiences. I was going to pubs to try and discover more beers. I was going to museums, I was going to theater and arts, and I was traveling around basically with the money I made. So I can imagine why they didn't see it as a serious effort. Which is why after my studying ended, I did start now my own business as a tour guide. So now you know all the experiences I had the past few years, and I hope to bring these experiences to you whenever I do one of my guided tours. So I do hope that I'll see you in Ghent, in Bruges, or one of the many other towns I hope to run tours in the near future. Now, if you're not a traveler, I hope you did get all the advice about sales pitches and how to talk to an audience as a takeaway from this video, and I hope you enjoyed it nevertheless. If you did enjoy my video, be it as a stranger, be it as a traveler, I hope you don't forget to like, subscribe, and do visit my Facebook page for more Beardbarian adventures. Cheerios!